Chapter 14 Mazin. Before the incident with the Shadow Jinn, Mazin had never been afraid of the dark. Now he could not fall asleep without burning a kerosene lamp. It did not fully banish his fear. How could it, when the very existence of light caused shadow to form? But the light was a welcome sight when he woke from his nightmares. They were always the same. Omar stalked toward him in the diwan, knife raised. Sometimes, when Mazin was being stabbed, he remembered things. Silver blood on the lips of the dead man, assassins in black riding through the desert, Omar smiling, with silver blood on his cheeks. He always awoke in a cold sweat, blankets thrown off as he struggled to breathe. "You are here," he would remind himself. "You are you." But the words comforted him when he was awake. They did not fend off the nightmares. Sometimes Mazin would glance at the walls and see the jinn's white-eyed shadow grinning at him. "Inconsequential," it murmured. And then when he blinked, the shadow would be gone. He could only pray his sleep-addled mind was playing tricks on him. The third day of the merchant's stay, Mazin was exhausted. He felt weary and wrung out, a feeling exacerbated by the pain from his wound. He was grateful, at least, that the sting had abated to a dull throb. Still, it took a great effort to force himself up for the morning meal. He'd been trying to make the Sultan see reason for days, and he was not going to stop now. He was groggy-eyed but determined as he carefully changed and exited his room. He was passing through the garden when he paused, noticing the midnight merchant crouched down in a bed of white roses. She was glancing at the sun as if it had personally offended her. Mazin thought she was beautiful. "You really should stop thinking about a criminal," his inner voice chided. But he couldn't help it. Here was the midnight merchant, the most elusive legend in Medine, a story brought to life, and she had saved him twice. The fact only endeared her to him more. The merchant, unfortunately, did not share the sentiment. The minute she saw him, her frown deepened. "Saidi, midnight merchant, will you be joining us for morning meal?" She tilted her chin. "No." He wasn't surprised. The Sultan had forced her to attend many events in the 2 days she'd been here. She had clearly hated every moment of her stay. Mazin tried to smile. An awkward silence ensued. The merchant turned away first. He cleared his throat. Nice day, isn't it?" "Hardly. It is impossible to enjoy the day when you're busy dreading the future." Mazin swallowed. "I'm sorry." The apology tumbled from his lips before he could think about it. "About the quest. My father, the Shadow Jinn." The merchant looked up, a peculiar expression on her face. "Why are you sorry about the Jinn?" "Because my brother left her alive and she hurt you, me, both of us." When he didn't respond, the merchant changed the subject. "So, am I to call you Prince Mazin, then, or—" Her brow lifted. "Mazin. Yusuf is another identity for another time." He shuffled on his feet, considering. Then he tried a question. "But you knew it wasn't my real name, didn't you? It was why you followed me." The only evidence of the merchant's surprise was a slow, careful blink. "A jinn made it her prerogative to hunt you down. I knew you were more than a simple scribe." The words hung between them, a silent accusation. But then, he had not been the only one lying. "And you?" he said. "What should I call you? Luli or Layla?" The merchant's lips quirked. "Luli. Layla is another identity, for another time." She turned away, leaving Mazin to stare and wonder at her back. He hesitated. Would she flee if he asked more questions? She obviously wasn't keen on speaking to the Sultan, but maybe she would talk to him. Cautiously, he stepped into the rose bed and crouched down beside her. "The stories they tell about you, the tales of Luli al-Nazari, the midnight merchant, are they true?" The merchant shrugged. "It depends on what they say. I haven't, for instance, single-handedly defeated a group of notorious robbers with magic, but I did once set a hideout on fire and let the robbers fight over the rescued spoils until they defeated themselves." There was humor dancing in her eyes. "And what about you, Prince?" She shifted so that her rust-brown eyes bored right into him. "They tell many stories of your brother, but you are a mystery. You are the son of a storyteller, and a storyteller yourself, yet there are no tales about you." The words were simple observation, but they fell on his shoulders like a physical weight. "Yes, there are not many stories to tell of a prince locked in a palace." "You can't leave?" Not without a retinue. He laughed weakly. Every outing would be a procession. And so you became Yusuf. She was still looking at him, brow furrowed. Mazen realized there was no judgment in her voice. She spoke matter-of-factly. Truth be told, I was just an anonymous man in the souk before I met you. You were the first to wonder about my identity. A sad smile curved his lips, though I doubt I'll be able to do it again any time soon. It was nice to live a fictional life for a time. Luli didn't respond, not immediately, but when she did, her words were a cold mumble. I understand what you mean. A reputation can be a nuisance. Apparently, it can even be used to blackmail a person into going on a perilous quest. Mazen flinched. He knew her bitter words were not directed at him, but that did not make him feel any less responsible for his father's cruelty. He was struggling to come up with a response when someone clamped a hand on his shoulder, startling him. He turned to see Omar looming behind them, surveying the scene with a lazy smile. Salam, Mazen. He looked at Luli. Midnight merchant? His voice was cool. Luli's expression went rigid. Hi, Prince. It is, as always, a pleasure. I hope you do not mind me stealing my brother away. Mazen frowned. What now? He was certainly not late for the morning meal. Not at all. The merchant rose from the bed of flowers and dusted off her robes. She looked out of place in the sunshine, a patch of night in a field of bright flowers. Yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged. No, with the confidence of someone who deserved better than this place, this quest. With a sigh, Mazen begrudgingly let Omar steer him away. They had not gotten far when the merchant called out to them. I'm curious, High Prince. Your black knives, where did you get them? They made even an incorporeal jinn solid. Mazen thought of the black knife in his dreams and flinched. He hadn't considered it before, but his brother's knives were strange, weren't they? They are the same as your blade, a weapon enchanted by jinn. Omar smiled over his shoulder, his lady-killing smile. Mazen had Hakim called it, though Luli did not look impressed. Do not worry. I will use them to protect you if the need arises. The merchant just rolled her eyes. She turned and walked away without another word, her dark robes flaring behind her. Mazen wished he could join her. She wasn't free exactly, not anymore, but she had been before his father found her, free to roam the desert and live as she wished, without the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders. Such a pleasant personality she has, Omar said. He gestured Mazen to follow. She has a better personality than you, at least, Mazen thought. He followed Omar through one of the open-air corridors, up a stairwell, and to a simple wooden door. He knew, even before entering, that it was a storage room, for a piece of parchment listing the inventory inside was pinned to the door. Before Mazen could ask what they were doing there, Omar pulled him inside. The room was full of cleaning supplies and shoddy, dusty furniture. Two servants sat at a table playing shatranj. They looked up at Omar's entrance and hurriedly vacated the area on his command. Once they left, Omar slid into one of the chairs and smiled. This will do perfectly for some peace and quiet. Is there a reason we're having this conversation here? I needed a room, and this was the closest one not filled with your spying servants. Mazen crept to the window ledge and positioned himself on the sill. Just in case I need to call for someone to rescue me, he thought. But the corridor outside was empty at this time of day. Knowing Omar, he had planned for this even. You remember the favor you promised me, Mazen? Omar's eyes glittered as he reached into the satchel at his belt and withdrew some golden object. I have found a way for you to repay me. He tossed the object at him. Mazen leaned forward barely in time to catch it before it dropped to the floor. He stared at the thing in his hands. It was a golden bangle, a gaudy thing with glittering jewels. A gift? You shouldn't have, Omar. He tried to smile, hoping it would mask his confusion. Oh, but I have. Omar reached into the satchel again and withdrew the same bangle. Mazen eyed the replica warily. I thought you found jewelry distasteful. Omar snorted. Not so much as distasteful as inconvenient. He slid one of the blades from his belt and held it out for Mazen. Feed one of the gems on the bracelet your blood. Instinctively, Mazen flinched away. Omar just waved the knife at him. I assure you there's a good reason. Well then, enlighten me. I'm not going to cut myself for some unknown reason. Omar set the knife down on the table with a sigh. Fine, you want an explanation? He held out the second bangle. Put this on. But I... Just do it, Mazen. He caught the bangle when Omar tossed it to him. After a beat of hesitation, he clasped it on to his left wrist. The sensation that followed was one of the strangest he'd experienced. He felt unbalanced and dizzy, as if the center of him had shifted. His body felt too cold, too big. He had the inexplicable urge to scrub at his skin until it flaked off. He blinked, and his vision sharpened, and the details of the room becoming more vivid. What just happened? He froze at the sound of his voice. Because it wasn't his voice. The timbre was too low, the words too heavy on his tongue. Omar, what? Mazen stopped abruptly. He'd caught sight of his appearance in a mirror wedged into a corner of the room. He looked away, then back again. The image remained unchanged. Omar bin Malik stared back at him, eyes wide with shock. Mazen touched his face, now his brother's face, and gasped. He said nothing at first, just stared with dawning comprehension at his changed reflection. Then the panic came, sharp and wild, and pried the bangle from his wrist and threw it on the cushions. When he again looked in the mirror, he was back to his own body. He brushed his hands over his face with a groan. Omar had the audacity to chuckle. Your melodramatic responses never fail to amuse. Mazen looked up sharply. What was that? Magic? Are these a pair of relics? He remembered the midnight merchant's bag of relics. Did you steal these from the merchant? Omar clicked his tongue. I only steal things I cannot get through other means. The merchant is not the only one who collects magical items. Mazen knew this. His father had a small collection of relics that had been donated to him by the hunters and nomads who roamed the desert. He paid good gold for them, of course, but the real reason anyone surrendered relics to him was because they feared him, finding out they possessed them. It was not a common problem. Relics were rare, after all. Omar continued speaking slowly, calmly, as if to a child. These bracelets are special. You remember the lamp the Jinn King enchanted for Amir? These were also created by that Jinn. They are as ancient as Amir's scrolls. Mazen picked up one of the bangles and ran his fingers over the gemstones in awe. Passed down through the family? For hundreds of years. They've been in the treasury gathering dust, so I doubt they'll be missed. He leaned forward. As you can see, I've already fed my blood to the one. In order to pull off our illusion, you must offer your blood to the other. Mazen's stomach nodded. Illusion? Omar smiled. We are going to switch places, Mazen. The bangle fell from his hands. But father wants you to accompany the merchant, and that is exactly the problem. I am preparing for an important operation with my thieves, and I cannot miss it. He rested his elbows on his knees, leaned forward. I thought you would be excited about this. Have you not always wanted to go gallivanting around the desert? Now you can. Mazen bit back a self-mocking laugh. As a child, he'd always craved adventure. The kind in his mother's stories, which featured heroes and magic and fantastical creatures. But that had been then, and this is now. Not this kind of adventure. Omar frowned. I have kept your secrets, Aki, and I have saved your life. You owe me this. Or, his eyes flashed. Would you like me to explain to the Sultan how the Jinn came to possess your shadow? Mazen's heart beat in his throat. It was you who brought the shadow Jinn back. You who provoked her. He held his tongue. He knew he could not afford to say the words. He knew that the Sultan's disappointment in Omar would be second to his anger at Mazen. But Omar's request, it was impossible. I don't know how to use a blade. I could never pretend to be you. Omar stabbed his knife into the table and smiled when Mazen recoiled. Never fear. I will send Aisha, my best thief, with you. She and my other thieves will know your true identity. If there is any fighting to be done, leave it to her. Mazen faintly remembered the hooded woman he'd seen with Omar in the courtyard. How was it that that meeting had been less than a week ago? What say you, Mazen? Omar tilted his head. Mazen let out a single strained that was half a cry for help, half a laugh. Before his mother's death, he thought the world outside Medine was a magical place. His mother had made it seem full of life and light and endless possibilities. And then she had been killed by one of the creatures in her stories, and the magic had disappeared. And yet, death in a free land is better than life in a gilded cage. He had told Luli al-Nazari he enjoyed stepping into a life where he could be someone other than himself, someone other than the overprotected son of a legendary storyteller. This was his chance to leave Medine, his single, dangerous chance. It would not be the first time he had pretended to be someone other than himself. Fine. Mazen lifted his head and met his brother's eyes. I will go on your adventure.